Okay, in this video, we're going to introduce vector valued functions. So let's first define these functions, and then we'll take a look at some examples, try to graph some of them, and finally end with some limits, but that may happen in a follow-up video. So vector valued functions, they're families of functions whose output is a vector. They are sometimes called plane curves if they are curves in 2 dimensions, and in 3 dimensions we call them space curves. We have already seen some of these actually. A lot of the parametric equations that we saw in 2 dimensions are examples of vector valued functions if we represent them slightly differently. And we have an example already of a space curve that we've seen, which is the line. And that's because these vector valued functions, I'm going to try to just draw a general graph of a vector valued function now and talk about some of their characteristics. So here's our 3-dimensional graph, and let's imagine that we have a curve that looks something like this. Maybe it turns on itself, maybe it doesn't, and it keeps going, right? So a vector valued function, we're going to call this curve C, and R of t describes a path that we take along curve C. And this path might begin, for example, at t equals A, and maybe ends at t equals b. We could end elsewhere. We could have a shorter path if we want. And the characteristics of this path is that if we start at t equals a, r of a is going to be a vector that points from the origin to the point on the curve. Then as t increases, we create vectors, position vectors. R of t generates position vectors that then will just point to all of the points that lie along our path. So again, the output of these functions are position vectors, and eventually we'll end up at t equals v, so I'm just going to write our ending point. So input is a scalar, and our independent variable that will take the value of that scalar we will call t. And the output of these vector functions are position vectors. And the heads of each of these position vectors trace the path that we take along the curve. Now, typically we would write r of t. If we are in 2 dimensions, we have 2 components. A function, the x component is a function of t, the y component is a function of t, and t has some parameter interval. We've seen this before. So our parametric equations that we saw in 2 dimensions can be thought of and represented as vector functions. So, and of course, this can also be written as x of t I plus y of t j. If we then move to 3 dimensions, like the diagram that I've represented, in 3 dimensions we're going to have 3 components. T is still the independent variable, and the output will be a vector that is dependent on whatever value of t we've chosen. And the head of that vector will land us on a point on the curve. T is still within some parameter interval. T is our parameter, so one independent variable, and each of the components depends on t. All right, so that is what vector functions are. So they can be parametric equations that we represent in vector form. So let's think of an example. For instance, in 2D, so this is in R2, this is something we've seen before. Suppose that I define x to be a cosine t, y is a sine t, and our parameter t will go from 0 to 2 pi. Well, we know that this represents a circle with radius a in this case, centered at the origin, in the counterclockwise direction. We've seen these parametric equations before. Now what's slightly different, if I represent this as a vector, I would write the components within my vector. So a cosine t, a sine t. We have the same parameter interval. We could also write this as a cosine t I plus a sine t j. And the way that we think about this vector function, if we were to sketch it, for example, we are in 2 dimensions, so here's our xy coordinate system. We have a circle of radius a, that is the curve, and the parametrized equation, or our vector function, will be a set of vectors. We'll start at, if this circle has radius a, we start here, a cosine t when t is 0, and we have position vectors that are going to point to points along this curve and trace out our path in the counterclockwise direction. So not very different from what we have seen. We're just representing our parametric equation in a more condensed way. All right, so let's talk about domain. So let's specifically think about space curves in 3 dimensions. And think about the domain of these space curves. So let's suppose that I have r of t, and my x component is some function f of t, y is g of t, and z is h of t. The domain of my function will be the largest set of values of t on which all 3 functions f, g, and h are defined. So we have to have a common domain among the 3 functions. Oops. Defined. Let's do a couple of examples, and then I will do a follow-up video to talk more about these space curves. So an example just to find the domain. So let's find the domain of the following space curve. Let's suppose that my vector function is the square root of 9 minus t squared I plus the square root of tj plus 6 over tk. I need a common domain among these functions. So first, we can see that our x component is defined by a square root, the square root of 9 minus t squared. Our y component is the square root of t, and our z component is 6 over t. If we take a look at x of t, we know that the domain of this function would be that 9 minus t squared must be greater than or equal to 0. If we factor 9 minus t squared, that will be 3 minus t times 3 plus t, and this product must be greater than or equal to 0. So I'm going to use a number line on which I plot t, and the values of t that make the inequality just equal to 0. So I'm going to put -3 here, and 3 will make this equal to 0. And I'm going to test parts of this t interval into my expression 3 minus t times 3 plus t to see what values will satisfy the inequality. So if I pick a test point that's smaller than -3, like -4, then this term will be positive, this term will be negative, so overall we'll have a negative value here. If I pick a value of t between -3 and 3, like 0, the first term in my product and my inequality will be positive, and as will the second, so the product will be positive. And picking a value of t greater than 3, like 4, I'll have a negative for the first term, a positive for the second, the product will be negative. So we can see the domain here will be t, such that t is between -3 and 3, and it can include both 3 and -3. That's the domain of my function of t that's in the x component. Let's look at y. Y is a little bit easier. We know that t must be strictly greater than or equal to 0 since we have a square root function. And z, since we're dividing by t, we know that t cannot be 0. Now, if we put all of these three together, we can write the domain of our function. So here we can see that we're going to have t greater than or equal to 0, and it can't be 0. So it seems like we're going to have a domain where t gets as close to 0 as possible but cannot be 0, up to 3, and including 3. If we write that domain in set notation, we're going to write values of t such that 0 is less than t and less than or equal to 3. And that is the common domain among all three components.